If you turn on the news right now, they'll tell you one of two things about Melbourne. They'll either say the market is crashing or the market is recovering. They give you one simple statistic, like Melbourne is up 0.1% this quarter. But here's the problem with that headline. It's a lie. There is no such thing as the Melbourne property market. The Melbourne market is actually made up of hundreds of micro markets moving in completely different directions at the exact same time. While one suburb like Kalkallo or Donnybrook is bleeding money because of oversupply, a suburb 20 minutes down the road is seeing double-digit growth like Craigieburn or Roxburgh Park because of an affordability crisis. I'm Sean. This is PropSpotter, and today we're doing a deep dive on markets within markets. I've pulled the data for the last 12 months to show you exactly what this means and how this works. We're going to look at the 3 worst performing suburbs in Melbourne, places where investors are actually losing equity, and compare them side by side with the 3 best performing suburbs. The difference between these 2 lists isn't luck, it's data. So let's get into it. Before we name the suburbs, I need you to understand why this separation is happening. In 2025 and 2026, we are seeing a phenomenon I call the borrowing capacity squeeze. Interest rates have stabilized, but they're still higher than they were 3 years ago. This means the average family can't borrow $1.5 million anymore. They can only borrow $800,000 or maybe less. And unless their income increases, with more rate rises incoming, they will only be able to borrow even less. So what happens? Demand evaporates from the top end of the market, the prestige suburbs, and it floods into the affordable corridors. It's like a water balloon. You squeeze one end and the other end bulges out. The suburbs we're about to look at prove this theory. The worst performers are often the victims of squeeze or oversupply or price. The best performers are the beneficiaries of that displaced demand. Let's start with the bad news first. Let's look at who lost money. First up, we have the heavy hitters, the blue chip suburbs, Toorak and South Yarra. Now, historically, these are blue chip suburbs, but over the last 12 months, data from CoreLogic and PropTrack have shown a decline in median house values, in some reports dropping between 3 to 5%. Why, you may ask? It's not because Toorak is a bad suburb. It's the borrowing capacity issue I mentioned earlier. When you have a median price into the millions, your buyer pool is small. When interest rates rise, that buyer pool shrinks even further. Vendors here are often holding out for that 2021 price, but the buyers just aren't there. If you bought here 12 months ago thinking blue chip never fails, you're most likely currently in the red. This is a classic example of the prestige correction. Next, we have a familiar story, Docklands and inner city generic units. We're seeing a flatline growth or continued price compression here. While the rental yields have improved because of the rental crisis, capital growth is stagnant. The data shows a massive supply of similar stock. When you have 500 2-bedroom apartments for sale in the same postcode that all look identical, you have zero pricing power. Investors here are often forced to sell at a loss if they need liquidity. This is a structural oversupply market. It behaves completely differently to a house on land just 5 kilometers away. Third, and this might surprise you, we have pockets of the outer west growth corridors like Fraser Rise. Now wait, you probably thought growth corridors were booming. They are, but not all of them. In some specific new estates, we've seen a dip, around 0.3% last year, or flatlining. Why? Because builders are catching up. There was a flood of land released and construction costs skyrocketed. Some people who bought land packages couldn't afford to finish the build, leading to distressed land sales. This is a supply shock market. It will recover, but right now it's underperforming compared to established suburbs, which are closer to all your amenities and the CBD. Now, bad news aside, we're not saying to stay away from the blue chip areas, the units, or the new estates. But what we are saying is that now isn't the right time to be investing in those asset classes. Affordable land and established houses are the best play at this point in the cycle when taking into account government policy, net migration, and the future. So let's shake that off and let's look at where money is actually being made. These suburbs didn't just survive the high interest rate environment, they thrived in it. Why? because they offered value. Number one is the sleeping giant of the West, Hoppers Crossing. For a long time, Hoppers was overshadowed by the flashy new estates in Tarnate or Truganina, but in the last 12 months, the market has realized something critical: land content. While you pay $650,000 for a house on a tiny 350 square meter block in the new estates, you can go to Hoppers Crossing and get a solid brick home on a 600 square meter block for roughly the same price. Let that sink in. This is the established value play. The infrastructure is already there. You've got the train station, you've got Pacific Werribee, and you have immediate freeway access. Buyers have stopped chasing the shiny new build and have started chasing actual land value. That shift in mindset has driven massive demand into Hoppers Crossing, pushing prices up while other areas stagnate. Number two is the lifestyle pivot. We're talking about Frankston. For years, people look down on Frankston, but the data doesn't lie. We've seen double-digit growth in the pockets of Frankston over the last 12 to 18 months. This is the ripple effect from the Mornington Peninsula. People want the beach lifestyle, but they can't afford Mornington or Mount Eliza, so they ripple out to Frankston. It's gentrifying rapidly. The old housing commission blocks are being knocked down or renovated. If you look past the old stigma and looked at the data, proximity to water, train station, huge block sizes, you would have made a fortune here in the last year. And finally, number three, Thomastown and Lalor. This is a classic bridesmaid suburb strategy. Everyone wants to live in Preston or Reservoir, but Reservoir is now expensive. Median houses are pushing close to $1 million. So buyers drive 5 minutes further north to Thomastown. We're seeing solid, consistent growth because it is the last pocket of affordable land in the north with good train access. It's not flashy, but the demand to supply ratio is incredibly healthy. It's pure, fundamental demand. So what does this tell us? It tells us that Melbourne isn't booming or busting. Number one, the top end is correcting because money is expensive. Number two, the bottom end is booming because it's the only place most people can afford. And number three, the middle ring is gentrifying. If you're looking to invest in 2026, don't just buy Melbourne. Don't buy an apartment in Docklands just because it looks cheap. And don't buy into a prestige suburb expecting immediate growth because it's famous. Look for the ripple effect, look for the infrastructure, and most importantly, look for the affordability ceiling. If you want to see the specific data charts I used in this video, or if you want me to help you find the next Hoppers Crossing before it booms, check the link in the description to book a strategy call with the PropSpotter team. We don't guess, we use data. I'm Sean, this is PropSpotter, and happy hunting.